2 weeks ago, I made a video comparing all 6 tanks after the first weekend of play in the Shadowlands Alpha, and I really wasn't very confident in making that video. I didn't feel like I had learned enough about tanks that I was able to compare all 6 of them, and more so, I didn't feel like there was a diverse enough pool of content for me to want to make a comparison on them. That's no longer the case 3 weeks in. I feel like we've learned a lot about tanks this weekend, and we have a lot of supporting evidence to show for tanks as well. In the description is going to be a link to a bunch of logs that I got while compiling evidence on the tanks in dungeons, especially. And we're going to talk a little bit about what I've learned from this testing, because a lot has changed, my opinion on tanks. So this definitely feels like a part 2 to the series. If you haven't seen the first video, which would be part 1, it's kind of mandatory. I mean, we're not going to really go and talk about the basics of tanks again. Instead, we're going to compare how I feel about them now to how I felt about them 2 weeks ago. So we're going to get started right away with the Brewmaster. This is the tank that 2 weeks ago I was talking a lot about. I was really interested in, and I feel like a lot of the interest paid off this week. The big thing was that Touch of Death did not function last week, and I had no idea how important that was going to be. It's such an interesting spell. It does it really does a lot of damage. Obviously, no matter where you are, it's going to do a lot of damage if you use it perfectly. It's a long CD, but also, the stagger thing. It's actually really interesting in trash, in 5-mans too, because you could actually, I actually killed a mob from 50% health with it, and that's a really big deal. But now that we have a Clash, right, which last time we didn't have because it was too high of a level. So now that we're higher level, we have Clash, and my God, am I happy that this spell is back. It's such a cool spell. It is really good. It actually acts as a pseudo interrupt, almost like a little death grip. It's a very fun spell. The only thing is, it seems like, if the mob cannot be moved, or maybe not interrupted as well, not rooted as well, it will not do anything, and you're just immune. It goes on CD, so I don't know. I can't really remember how it worked back in mob, but we also saw a lot about Exploding Keg versus Rushing Jade Wind. Apparently, Rushing Jade Wind is overpowered right now. If you have it up for 100% of the dungeon like you should, it's going to be your top damage. But I really like Exploding Keg because it also helps defensively as well as offensively. So I really like this, especially for Snap Threat. One of the big problems I had with Brewmaster was Snap Threat. It was a little bit awkward, especially, I just didn't know when to do things like Spinning Crane Kick. When should I use that? I probably need to use that, get some threat and then use that and stuff like that. I really wasn't sure. But the big thing that we saw this week was Celestial Brew. This spell is absolutely carving its way into the overpowered status. And last time we played with it, it did not have its timer shortened when you use Keg Smash and all that. Now it does. So that means with light brewing like I have, it is a 24-second CD baseline, and you could easily get it. We're probably looking at 15 to 18 seconds. I don't know. You guys play Brewmaster, you might know more, but this is ridiculous. I'm talking about one time in the dungeon testing, we had a 50-some thousand absorb. I mean, come on, that is that's a lot. That's over double my health on top of my health pool, right? So yeah, I mean, come on. This just seems like this is going to be overpowered. I think it's going to continue to be overpowered until it's nerfed. That's just how it's going to be. But, maybe I'm wrong about that, because obviously the Brewmaster losing its magic mitigation is really going to crutch on that spell there. So we'll see how it goes. I did notice that purification or whatever, purifying brew, it seems like it maybe gives you a stack per level of stagger. I really couldn't tell, but it seemed like when we had yellow stagger, we'd get 2 stacks of it, and we'd have red stagger, we'd gain 3 stacks of it. But yeah, definitely a lot in the second dungeon, especially. I was gaining 2 stacks every time I purify. So that meant that potentially 2 casts of that was just quadrupling my health pool. So pretty ridiculous. Now Warrior is next. And unfortunately, Warrior is just kind of slowly creeping into my, I think this is the weakest tank mindset. And I don't want to feel that way, because Warrior was obviously strong in pretty much all through BFA, especially after season 2. But I think a lot of that strength came from their offense. And we did try our best to try some new offensive stuff. I was, testing around the different talents and Crackling Thunder and stuff. But I just don't really see it anymore. I just don't know what Warrior's niche is. In BFA, you could arguably say they're undisputed kings of offense, and that's definitely true, but corruption really blurred the line on that a lot this last season. And then you could also say that they're like extremely good physical mitigators. And, armor and block and everything, that looks really good on paper, but if you don't play it exceptionally well, like I do, like I don't play it exceptionally well is what I'm trying to say. It's really like, it kind of is just waiting. You know what I mean? Like there's a lot of times where I felt like there was just no clear path forward other than just spamming a certain key and waiting for it to be available. So I don't know. The one thing I will say is that I keep feeling like War Machine is just overpowered. It might not look like a lot of rage. Somebody did the math in stream the other day. It's basically, like it's only one more rage per auto attack or something like that. But it's like it really adds up over the course of a dungeon. And then when you get the kill, which was happening quite a lot, killing an enemy instantly generating 10 rage. So there was a lot of times where I just felt like I had way too much rage, and like spending the rage wasn't as powerful as I expected it to be. But of course, I was playing the spec terribly. All I know is it's the spec that I feel like I identify with the least, and I think the nerfs were real on this spec for sure. Like, they're not as bad as maybe some people think they are, but physically, they're no longer. I wouldn't say they're kings of physical defense anymore, right? Like, there's so many other options out there now. Like, so many tanks got buffed, where warriors like effectively got nerfed, and especially because some of their talents have kind of hindered them in some ways. So we'll see what happens. But the big thing was that shield wall is now a 50% damage reduction. That was something that we had to get while we were leveling. So now 4-minute CD, 50% damage reduction. So that's probably going to help a lot. But yeah, otherwise I'm kind of just sitting here wondering what Warrior's niche is right now. If it doesn't have any strong utility interactions, like we talked about Menace, talked about charging and intervening. These things just don't really seem like they're going to have a huge value right now. So I kind of just wonder where Warrior's going to sit. It's definitely the tank I find I have the least confidence in going into potentially season 5 or whatever we're going to call it when that happens. Now, the complete opposite can be said about Paladin. I have to say, this spec really opened my eyes this week, and I'm going to tell you why. Something happened that I just kind of stumbled upon, but I am very glad that happened because it was a very interesting experience. Okay, and what we're talking about here is Handed the Protector talent with Word of Glory. Okay, so if you haven't seen, Word of Glory is now the replacement for Light of the Protector. It uses holy power, and of course the old version looks very similar on paper. It's just a heal, right? And you can use it on anybody. You could use it on yourself. You could use it on other players. That used to require a talent, which no longer happens. So instead, the talent allows you to heal based on the missing health of the target, not just you. Now, this isn't always a good thing, I think, but I think 9 times out of 10 it probably is. Because a lot of the times, if you were high health, you would want to heal somebody else. And this means it's going to be a lot more effective. Now, if you're going to go back and look at a VOD, you might want to go back and look at the Paladin video, the Paladin part of the video from Friday afternoon, because I was astounded at how much healing I was able to do with Word of Glory on my teammates. And I think the main thing is that it's just so much more usable compared to when you had a CD-based heal, right? Now you have a holy power-based heal. If you haven't seen this interaction as well, Shining Light, Judgment reduces the cost of your next Word of Glory. So that plus Divine Purpose potentially means you might be rattling off 2 to 3 of these heals every time you use the spell. And if you're using that on allies instead of yourself, meaning that you're really comfortable, but your allies aren't and they need extra healing, that is a really, really, really good thing. And I have to say, that was like one of the most fun things I did this weekend. Healing my friends, my allies, the people in the dungeon. It was like, wow, these guys are struggling. I'm going to help them out with this heal. And of course, you still have Lay on Hands, and you're going to still have potentially Judgment of Light in certain situations. So I do feel like Prop Pally is like this support tank right now. That's what people were saying in the chat. And I totally agree with it because, you could cleanse, you could heal, you could bop, you could freedom, and you could also stack and all that stuff. So yeah, I really, this tank is really growing on me. And another thing I was surprised to see, now I don't really know what this means, but we're looking at the logs, we're comparing the Prop Pally logs to the other tank logs, and we noticed damage taken per second, was one thing, right? I'm not going to talk about that right now, but what we did notice was there was a percentage of mitigation on that list, and that was actually the highest. Prop Pally had the highest percentage of the damage mitigated. Now, I don't know what that means. I really don't. I'm not huge into like studying analysis of logs like this, but I was kind of surprised by that because a lot of people were saying like, Prop Pally has a bit of a weakness right now in BFA. Their physical defense is not very strong compared to other tanks. And, maybe that's true. Maybe it's not. I don't know. But I definitely feel like this expansion, it's going to be, I think Holy Power just did wonders for them. And I really felt like I learned that this weekend because, first of all, their health was very stable. I had a lot of resets thanks to Divine DP procs and getting extra shields out. But also, I was able to heal a lot when I didn't need my own, I wasn't worried about my own health, which did happen quite a lot in those dungeons. But of course, that's a normal dungeon. So, we'll see how that transfers into more difficult content. Now, Bear was the one that I felt like it was the one that confirmed everything that I thought about them. Like I hadn't done a lot on Bear. It was mostly world content. I was thinking like, man, they feel really sturdy right now. Very, very capable, decent offense, decent defense. They're good all around, right? Kind of like in BFA, Bear's kind of the jack of all trades, maybe master of none, unfortunately. And, even though they have some hits with, mitigation or hits with utility coming into Shadowlands, I'm really loving Renewal. I think this is probably one of the best talents any class has gotten. It's up there with some of the Blood DK editions, honestly, and it makes such a big difference. It's such a short CD too, 1.5 minute CD. 30% heal when you have a health pool like Bear might have is a really cool concept. I love that a lot. And then, of course, Berserk, just doing some really good damage with that, keeping Iron Fur up like a ton. We talked about this a bunch. Like, I don't actually know what the armor cap is or whatever, but either way, when you have Iron Fur up, when you have a Berserk going, Iron Fur is going to keep you at that armor cap. So that's a really powerful thing considering it's a 3-minute CD. It's definitely something that Bear needed. And I felt like the logs really confirmed that Bear is a very capable tank right now. Unfortunately, I still don't feel like they have a niche. I don't think that's ever going to change. Like, they still may very well be the worst tank for Mythic Plus dungeons just because every other tank has a niche. Like, I don't know what Warriors is right now, mostly especially because they lost that offensive prowess. But, I do think Bear's probably better than Warrior at this state. But it's like, I just still don't really know. Bear doesn't have that one thing. So let me know. What do you guys think about that? But anyway, the last two, these are the ones that I think I learned the most about. Vengeance, Demon Hunter. Now, the last time we sat down, we talked a lot about offense and we talked a lot about, just how they played. All I noticed this week is they are a freaking offensive machine. I'm telling you, Spirit Bomb is as strong as it's ever been. Fell Devastation with these different talents for Demonic and Runa's Bulwark. It's just insane how powerful that spell is. Like, it's something that Demon Hunters probably should have been always using. It just wasn't possible before. And now that it's baseline, it's a different class. It really is. Fell Devastation plus Spirit Bomb equals you are all set. You're top in the charts, top in the HPS. You're in meta form. It's as good as any combo can get. I'm telling you right now, this class is feeling extremely, extremely potent. But the other thing we learned is they get smacked around in dungeons, man. And I don't play it very good. I do think it's one of the classes I play a little bit better than I might give myself credit for, just because it's not that different from Blood DK. But it is definitely different, and I definitely need to work on playing it better. It's just like, man, I felt like I was getting smacked around at times. And it's a little bit, I feel like they have less tools. That's kind of the big thing. Like right now, Blood DK got about like 6 new tools, man. They got all kinds of new shiny toys. Vengeance, I mean, they got meta and they got the Fell Devastation with Demonic. That's pretty swell, but I don't know, man. If you're not crushing the offensive charts, I feel like the spec might be a little weaker. But as they are doing that right now, I think it's one of the best tanks. It's really potent for leveling. They can do some really big things. So it's just kind of like 1v1. It's a little weak, but man, and whenever you're fighting multiple targets, this is a crazy spec. I think this might be the king of offense right now. So, and then, yeah, nothing really changed with Vengeance other than that. I just was surprised to see now that we got the logs working. I was surprised to see how much offense they're actually doing. So check some of those logs out. It's really nuts. And then Blood Death Knight. Now, this is my main. We're doing it last for a reason because the Blood Death Knight is a tank that I felt like I grew the most on. And that's basically because of a new spell, right? Well, we also got, a couple things that we're not going to talk about as much, but the main thing is Rune Tap, okay? Where is that? I'm sorry, Blood, I keep saying Rune Tap. Blood Tap, okay? Blood Tap is now accessible, level 58. We finally got it. Consume the essences around you to generate 1 rune. 1 minute recharge. Recharge time reduced by 2 seconds whenever a bone shield charge is consumed. Now, first of all, I use this terribly. Like, wow, did I use this bad? Okay. Like, literally forgot about the spell probably 50% of the time I was in combat. Not ideal. Another thing is that should be noted, the spell is not on the global cooldown. Okay. So that's probably a good thing for 90% of players. For me, it's a little bit of a problem because I often spam my 6 key. That is Death Strike. Obviously, I'm trying to get those Death Strikes off. And sometimes I hit shift when I'm trying to use other spells. It happens a lot when I'm trying to shift up into using Death's Advance, but I'll often accidentally hit shift 6 and shift 5 at the same time. And that caused a couple problems for me when I was testing. And the bigger problem right here, watch this, watch what happens here, okay? Look at that. You can use it and you get nothing from it at times. You can use the spell when you have full runes. Now, you know, a pragmatic individual might say, this is gameplay. This is how it's supposed to work. You should be making conscious decisions with it. But those two things together actually make the spell very difficult for me to use. I constantly found myself, like, I had to basically save it until I was 100% sure that I wanted to use 2 back to back, because the likelihood that I accidentally used 2 back to back was much higher than it should have been. So I basically wanted to make sure that I never used it on the pull, because if I would waste a charge of it, that would be like catastrophic, right? And I also need to be very conscious about my spamming. So maybe that would make me a better player. I don't really know, but I'll say this. Blood DK is a titan right now, man. They have definitely been the most improved tank, even though I think Brewmaster gained some crazy stuff and Prop Pally gained maybe the most, like the biggest paradigm shift of any tank. This is insane how much healing Deathstrike is doing. Let me put it this way. On the logs, you can go ahead and look at them. On the logs, we see Deathstrike healing 60+% overhealing, so much so that Blood Shield was my top heal. We actually saw in a dungeon, Blood Shield was my top heal overall for the dungeon. That is because Deathstrike was so overkill and I was using it so often thanks to especially Blood Tap and the overall rune accessibility right now. It was healing so overheal so often that I basically was wasting it and all I was getting out of it was the blood shield. Now, I don't know if that's intentional, but here's the reason that is happening. Relish in Blood is basically you have now 3 spells. So if you didn't know, Blood Deathstrike was buffed. It's now 30% of damage taken in the last 5 seconds, minimum 10% of health. So I think it used to be 20 and 7, maybe it's 25 and 7, something like that. But either way, you now have 3 spells that buff that even further. And this one is probably not going live like this. Take a good look at this. This spell is not long for this world. Deathstrike's healing is increased by 20%. It's just a passive. It just makes it heal for more. There's no way that's going live. And the leech itself is obviously strong too, but I think this spell is broken, honestly. I mean, compared to Death Pack, this is a joke, right? This is a 2-minute CD, and it heals you for 50% of your maximum health, but also absorbs 30% of the next health in an absorb. So you're talking about this might make that Deathstrike heal for 50%. What do I need Death Pact for? I don't need Death Pact. I get to heal for 50% of my health with each Deathstrike. Why would I want that? So that plus Relish in Blood, Hemostasis, we tried that, and all of those things together were insane. We also tried Rune of Unending Thirst. I was actually really surprised with how powerful that was. It was a lot better than I expected it to be. So yeah, that's pretty much it, man. I think all the tanks, have their nice little niches and they're developing really well. But I think Blood DK is really emerging as it's going to be the king of 5-ans again. They just got so many tools. So now let's talk about their new Covenant ability. I want to go through this each at least one time, even if it's just to give my initial impressions on it. Unfortunately, we weren't able to actually use the Covenant abilities in dungeons. I don't know why that's the case, but that's how it was. So we're going to take it off the bars here, and you'll see it clearer. The Venthyr zone ability unlocked. Also, something else like this ability, we didn't get to use it in dungeons. It basically just teleports you. People are talking about being able to skip trash with it, and they're saying like, oh, this is going to be mandatory for Mythic Plus. I don't really know how I feel about that. Although after seeing what I've seen here, I could easily say that this is really pulling ahead for me as a Covenant for a couple reasons, but this ability just works excellent for Blood DK. So here's how it is. It's a 1-minute CD. It uses 1 rune, but again, that's barely a problem now with the new playstyle. Deals 293 shadow damage every 1 second to enemies within 10 yards. And every time it deals damage, you gain 3 runic power up to a maximum of 15 runic power. So this is basically a reverse Bone Storm. It is going to increase your survivability thanks to 10% dodge, which is a bigger deal than you think as a tank like Blood DK. It's going to do a good amount of damage to everything near you with no AoE cap, by the way, something everybody's concerned with for some reason. And it's going to give you a ton of runic power. Okay. So guess what? I'm going to pop this on the pole and then I'm going to get a free Bone Storm. So I'm literally going to use 2 insanely powerful offensive and defensive spells within 2 globals of each other. And I'm going to wreak havoc when there's more than, 5 or so targets. It's going to be insane. All of these things, both of those things together seem really good. But you know what? After doing a lot of testing, I'm not sure I even want to do that anymore because Deathstrike is healing and doing so much damage. And I feel like I just have so much access to runic power now thanks to Blood Tap. It's like, oh, why would I even bother with Bone Storm anymore? But either way, I think this is probably the most impactful Venthyr Covenant ability. It might not be the strongest or the one that is going to be used, to the highest level, but it looks awesome. It's a 1-minute CD and it works perfectly for what Blood DK wants. It might not be great for Frost or other specs. It works perfectly for what Blood DK wants. So that's the Blood DK one. Let's go ahead and talk about the other ones. But I would say that without question, there's some that are cooler and maybe they have a bigger numerical impact, but that one really just like giving you that runic power is so big. Like that, people don't understand how big that is. You know what I mean? Using a rune is going to give you 10 runic power anyway. And then that kind of passive dodge and generation of runic power is just such a strong way to open pack. And it's a 1-minute CD. It's so perfect for Mythic Plus. So let's take a look at Demon Hunters next. Unfortunately, this one is bugged. Or it doesn't work. I'm not really sure what to say, but it does not seem to function the way it's supposed to. But it sounds like it's a really cool ability. So basically, brand an enemy with the mark of the Venthyr, also a 1-minute CD, reducing their melee and casting speeds by 30% and inflicting 4,000 shadow damage. That is a lot of damage, by the way. If you're not familiar with the stat squish, 4,000 damage, like compared to Fiery Brand. Fiery Brand is also a 1-minute CD, and it only does 1.2 thousand damage, or it's about 1.3 thousand fire damage, and then some damage over time. So yeah, like this spell does a lot more than pretty much every other spell you have. But the big thing here is activating Metamorphosis applies Sinful Brand to all enemies. That's what it says. That's not what it does. It doesn't do anything. I could not find any discernible interaction with Metamorphosis and this spell. Jix and others were saying that it seemed like maybe if you put this on the target and then meta, it's supposed to kind of spread like wildfire. That didn't happen. I tried just using meta. It didn't apply it. So I don't know how it's supposed to work. But all I know, if you are able to spread this ability to multiple targets, I might not be saying what I'm saying about the Blood DK one. Because this seems like it would be even better. Because it's kind of just the same spell, right? Only you don't need the resources from it. So you don't get resources from it. Instead, you get insane offense, but also melee and casting speed by 30%. That is a actually really big deal, like a really big deal for a 1-minute CD, because that does not just affect you. That might actually save your group members, your co-tank and raid. That could be a very high skill ability. So I can't say for sure how it works right now. All I know is 1-minute CD with that amount of damage output and that potential casting speed slow by 30%. This could be one of the best spells in the game for all covenants. Okay, so yeah, it's just untestable. Like it doesn't work currently, and I don't really know what's actually happening with it. But from what I can tell, it's probably going to be if you apply it and then you pop meta, it will spread it kind of like wildfire. But we don't know for sure. And hopefully maybe in the next build that'll be fixed. But otherwise, nothing else for Demon Hunter. That spell being broken was kind of a disappointment because they got no new interactions while leveling. They have very few spells anyway. And of course, the main reason I wanted to test it was not needed, was not working. And also the zone ability, the movement ability. I mean, it's probably the least important one for Vengeance, right? Like they definitely don't need any more movability. So anyway, now Bear. Unfortunately, Bear have the worst one by like this is an absurd spell. This is a stupidly designed spell. I don't know who designed this. I actually left feedback on the Bear thread because I'm a little insulted by this spell. Based on some of the other ones, I'm a little bit insulted. Ravenous Frenzy. Okay, first of all, it's a 3-minute CD. That's a bit ridiculous. But here's what it does. For 20 seconds, Druid spells you cast increase your damage, healing, and haste. by 2% stacking. If you spend, this is the stupid part, if you spend 1.5 seconds idle, the frenzy overcomes you, consuming 3% of your health per stack and stunning you for 1 second, then ending. So you might waste a 20-second duration on a 3-minute CD by lag or getting knocked back or stunned or something like this, and you could just have wasted your entire spell. Now, again, you might say like, oh, well, you're just playing bad. That's not the spell's fault. But this is tell me if I'm wrong about this. I have not seen another class, whether in Bastion or in the Venthyr Covenant, have a detriment to using their ability. This is the only one I have seen. I haven't tried every class, but out of all the 6 tanks, there's not another one out there. I don't like, what the hell is this? They got a garbage one from the previous, from the Bastion Covenant, and they're getting just an absurd, like, this is just stupid. Who designed this? Why is there a detriment to using a powerful CD? Now, something to be clear on, this is probably really good for healers. This probably is really good for healers because allowing you to get 20% extra damage as a healer, that's probably great. Okay. But for me, it's just useless as a tank. Like, this is not that good that it should be a 3-minute CD, but it does get pretty powerful. And I should also be clear that, besides that it looks cool, you can just swipe. You see what I'm saying? This counts for whatever reason. Even though I'm not hitting a target, it is still stacking. It is not going away. I am not getting stunned. But if you get 10 stacks of this thing, 10, 11 stacks of this thing, and you go idle, look how much health. Look at that. I just lost 30% of my health because I used my goddamn cooldown that's supposed to be spec defining Venthyr Covenant ability. I just took damage from misusing my ability. That is ridiculous. And I guarantee this, there's going to be a high profile death in some serious content. And I said this and people are like, no, there's not, because nobody plays bear in serious content. But either way, at some point, there's going to be a high profile death, and this ability is really going to look absurd on the chart of overall ability. So I don't know. I'm just a little venting a little bit on this. I think it's just poor design. I mean, maybe it's going to change. That's what alpha's for, obviously. But that is definitely the worst ability. I mean, it's the least tangible one too. Like, it's impossible to say, I know exactly what I'm going to get out of this, because you have to use it so often to get it to stack high enough that it becomes strong. A 20% damage reduction or a 20% damage increase plus a 20% haste increase is great, but you have to use it a lot to get to that point. So Paladins, though, if bears didn't have that weird interaction that I'm talking about where you're potentially killing yourself by using it poorly, this is definitely the worst one. It's awesome looking. The spell, like the spell itself is awesome. The icon is amazing, but it is definitely just an awkward spell. Okay, and again, a ton of damage. But let's talk about it. 4-minute cooldown, so the longest CD out of any of these. 1.4 second cast. That's a big problem too. Halo the target area, dealing 12,500 shadow damage split amongst enemies and restoring 13,000 health split amongst injured allies over 12 seconds. Now we'll break that down, but let's keep going. The land remains filled with anima, causing 2.8k shadow damage to all enemies over 1 minute. You gain the benefits of consecration while in the area. Now, first of all, let's talk about why this is just a flawed design spell. A 4-minute CD with a 1.4 second cast that lasts 1 minute on the ground, but does like 90% of what's it going to do in the first 12 seconds of that minute. This is just a really awkward spell to use as a tank, because there's times when you just don't want to move out of this. You don't want to stay in this. You have to move, you have to kite, you have to dodge abilities, and you are going to move mobs out of this ability. And that is brutal when we're talking about a 4-minute CD. This is definitely the least usable spell. It's amazing looking, but it's a freaking channel. So you basically have to use it before you pull, and then you have to drag the mobs into it. The big problem here is it splits the damage. And that is a really awkward thing about this ability, because it looks great, all right? 12,000 damage. That is insane. But when you're splitting that up 5 ways, then it's like, oh, it's just worse than the Blood Decay or the Vengeance one, you know what I mean? And it's a 4-minute CD compared to a 1-minute CD. So I don't know. We'll see how much the healing is impacting the class. We couldn't use it in dungeons. This is clearly a dungeon ability. It's going to suck in raids, especially if you got 20 people standing in it. It's going to really dilute the healing on a 4-minute CD. It's going to feel like it's barely healing anybody. It might add up, but still. So yeah, we'll see. Right now, I don't like this ability at all. And other than it looking awesome, I think it's probably my least favorite one. But it has the potential. I think what they should do, and also the thing, like when you're standing in it, you have the effects of Consecrate. Well, that's good because the only purpose for this is like if you're kiting from one side of it to the other and you ran out of your own Consecrate. Otherwise, you're just going to drop Consecrate again. It's a freaking 5-second CD. You know what I mean? You're always going to be standing in your Consecrate unless you're terrible at the spec. That ability doesn't help. It needs more. It needs a shorter CD. I think it should just replace Consecrate. I think it should be that big and replace Consecrate. That's another thing about it. It being that big, it might actually pull trash that you did not want to pull. Or somebody might CC something at the last second and it might wander in and you might use the ability and it might aggro stuff. Like this is just, it's an awkward ability. Okay. Now I'll tell you what's not an awkward ability. This ability, the Prot Warrior one, is gorgeous. And I got to show you this. I got to find something to fight because it is gorgeous. It is the best looking spell in the entire game. I'm going to say that. The weird thing about it is it's like not a spell. It's just, it replaces Execute. And when you get it, it just says Learn Condemn, replacing Execute, which is something I have to do every time I log in and out of this character for some reason. So I think it's just bugged, right? I don't think that's supposed to happen. But either way, I get the spell. It's going to go Execute. It's going to change. It's going to change to Condemn now, okay? So let's read Condemn. Unfortunately, here, I'll just move the cam because you want to be able to see this, right? Oops. All right, look at this. Okay, Condemn. So it's basically, you still can't see it. It's basically the same spell as Execute, but it's got a couple things added onto it. So 20 to 40 range, just like Execute. Condemn a foe to suffer for their sins, causing up to 1.8 thousand shadow damage, only usable on enemies who are above 80% health or below 20% health. So much more usable Execute, really powerful. It's going to be really powerful for bosses. Going to be so powerful for bosses, right? Any big health target or a target kind of like a boss that's meant like kind of like Rathion, right? Where you're kind of not fighting him a lot. So he's in that 80% range for a long time. He's in that 20% range for a long time. And then you're fighting other targets that are in the 80 and 20% range. That is going to be really powerful for a fight like that. But the other thing is the primary target is weakened, preventing up to 4,000 damage they might deal. Now, it's hard to quantify that, and again, we weren't able to test it in dungeons, but it sounds like a really cool concept. And then if the foe survives, that's how it normally is. But yeah, this is such a cool spell. Let's go ahead and see if we can't get a little bit of show. I can't show it off here. Yeah, this is how we're gonna do it. I'm just gonna aggro this thing here, okay, and then we're gonna avatar. And look at this spell. Watch this spell. Oh, it just looks so freaking cool, guys. It is such a cool looking spell. I have to say that I am really impressed with the visual here. It almost looks like something right out of Dark Souls. Like, look at that. It looks a lot like the great ultra great sword, like R2 or whatever, where you kind of pull it back and smash it on top of the enemy's head instead of actually like hit the person with it. You know what I mean? Like you don't swing it, you kind of lunge it at them. That is what it looks like. And man, does it look cool. Like let's show it another time here. Oh, it's just so cool looking. And we tested it a lot with some other abilities, like some as like arms warrior and stuff like that. And it looks even cooler for like a big two-hander when you slam that on them. Because don't forget, this is not just a Prot Warrior ability. This is for all warriors. So even though I don't think it's that powerful and it's buggy, it's still like probably my favorite Covenant ability because it's just so freaking cool. Like it's not the strongest. It's not the one I think I'm going to want to use the most. But when you have that ability, it's like, wow, that's the coolest looking spell in the game. So anyway, that's the warrior one. It's out to lunch how good that makes them do less damage to you thing is. I don't know how that's going to play out. But yeah, for now, I think it's just very visually appealing, just like everything in this expansion. They've really gone above and beyond with some of the spells and some of the things in this expansion, the architecture of the zone especially. So last one is Brewmaster, and this is probably the most confusing one. I don't really know how to feel about this one. And again, since I wasn't able to test it in dungeons, it's really hard to say. But basically, it just summons a bunch of clones, and it's not quite what you think. It's not like the the clones from Storm, Earth, and Fire for Windwalker. It's much different. So let's read it. 3-minute CD again. These longer CDs, I always feel like these are going to be worse because they're going to be harder to use. But let's talk about it. Opens a mirror for 24 seconds, summoning reflections of your Order's Fallen Ox, Crane, and Tiger adepts every 1 for 6 seconds. So I don't know what that means. I think it just means every 6 seconds it summons a mob, but it definitely doesn't do that. I mean, it summons way more mobs than that would be. So I'm not really sure what that means. But either way, it summons one of those 3 types of things. Fallen monks that have mastered the Axe style, meaning they're a tank, will also attack your enemies with Breath of Fire and assist for an additional 2 seconds. So again, haven't been able to test this in dungeons. Presumably what happens is it can summon a Windwalker, a Mistweaver, or a Brewmaster. The Brewmaster might taunt and might also hit with Breath of Fire, meaning they'll do less damage to you, presumably. The Windwalker will just do a bunch of AoE damage. We saw Fist of Fury and all that. And then the big one is the Mistweaver is going to heal you. So I've had up to 3 Mistweavers out at a time, and they're actually healing me for quite a lot. So let's use the spell. You'll see, first of all, it looks amazing. The actual thing that spawns looks freaking awesome. It's the mirror from Wakecrest, if you haven't seen it. But there's 1, there's 2, there's 3. So already there's 4. You know what I mean? Actually, there's 5. Yeah, so they don't last forever. There's 6. So it's definitely summoning more than it says it's supposed to. But as you see, that one's healing me. The one with the staff on his shoulder, that's the Keg Smasher. That's the Brewmaster. But these ones healing me. Like, it's healing for a little bit, right? Like 306, 153. Like, so if you had a couple of those out healing you, it's going to do a lot, right? And they kind of just walk around, do their own thing. So it's a great spell. I quite like the idea. It's a long spell. I don't really feel like it makes a lot of sense. Like, why is that a monk ability? I'm not really sure. It seems maybe more like a warlock ability or maybe even a mage ability. But it's quite cool. I like the fact that they come out and help you. So it just depends on how they help you. Wasn't able to test that. So that's pretty much everything for the video. In the last video, we ranked all, how I felt like on offense, defense, stuff like that. Nothing's really changed. The only thing I'm going to say is that Brewmaster is easily rising up the charts on defense. Like, I think they are going to be the kings of defense this expansion yet again. I mean, they already are, but this Absorb, they might actually be the top HPS tank in the game. When I look at the logs, they're down below. They might be the top HPS tank of the game. Honestly, they might be the top HPS tank in the game. And that would be very easy for them to accomplish, honestly. Especially if they could game it, if they could work around that ability. Celestial Brew, if they could work around Celestial Brew, Guard being back in the game effectively, they could easily be the top HPS tank in the game right now. And on top of that, they just have they're already very powerful, right? The only thing is their magic mitigation is going to hurt them. So, and then in terms of offense, the big riser of the week was Demon Hunter. Demon Hunter really showed off in these dungeons I did. I was very impressed with how much offensive power the Demon Hunter had. And really, Spirit Bomb plus Fell Devastation into meta is just a god tier 1-2 combo. Like, it is so freaking powerful. And when you do it on the pull, you just feel like you are at the next level of tanking. You're going to top the charts on HPS and offense, and you're just going to look so cool doing it. But then, the whole kit of Death Knight really came together now that we have Blood Tap. I was so impressed with Blood Tap and how potent that was going to make these offensive rotation, because you're going to have so much more access to runes. And especially, you guys know, especially in the beginning of an expansion, Blood DK is notoriously haste starved. They are so hungry for it. And giving more power with some of these talents is going to help substantially, to the point where I literally think Bone Storm is going to be a wasted talent. I think you're just going to take, now with the improved Red Thirst, I think you're just going to take Vamp Blood, and you're just going to freaking, my God, are you just going to Death Strike your way to the top? And then, Paladin was the class that I was most impressed with the utility of, because I had no idea how potent the group healing had the potential to be. So that's everything. We had some, we had a lot of comments in the last video. Some people, so the one comment that really stuck out, not that I really like, it's whatever, but one comment said that he was very disappointed that I was satisfied that tanks are not changing a lot. I said that in the last video, I guess. And I probably said that about Bear, that I was very comfortable. It felt like I was going home. You know what I mean? Like, that's the tank that I've been playing the whole time, and they're not changing. I think this is a good thing. What do you guys think? Let me hear your thoughts on this. What do you guys think? Because this one commenter was very upset with me saying that. And he was basically saying, like, I can't trust your opinion because you don't want the classes to change. But for me, it's like the complete opposite. Nobody should want the classes to change. We're trying to play the game at a competitive level. So anytime we have to go backwards to relearn something to get back to that competitive level, I don't want that. You know what I mean? And I know that, like, the sexy change of an expansion is a new class or some big change to the game. But, you know, a couple tanks did get those big changes. Prop Pally, Brewmaster, and Death Knight got a lot of big changes. Demon Hunter as well. Warrior 2 for better or for worse. Maybe Bear stood pat, but for honestly, I think that's for the best. As long as these tanks, like, if we don't have to have a completely like fresh slate relearn of all 6 tanks, I think that everybody is better for that. You know, you could take the knowledge you had from the last few years and get even better at the game. That's my point on that. So let me know what you guys think about this. Look forward to covering more tanks. You know, we're going to keep learning. We're going to keep trying the Covenant abilities, keep trying dungeons. I really like this whole log the dungeon and display the evidence. So make sure you check that out. We're going to have a ton of links in the description. But otherwise, let me know. I'm going to be reading every comment. Love to discuss what you guys think is going on with tanks, how you feel, Warrior, you know, Bear, some of these tanks that are kind of on the weaker end historically, how you think they're shaping up in Shadowlands, and we'll continue the discussion there. So thanks for watching. We will see you in the next one.